Join us in today's conversation, where we disclose the inner workings of the intelligence apparatus with Daniele Irandoost and Reverend David William Parry.
So during the Cold War, the CIA was concerned that the UFO sightings could be utilized by the Soviets as a psychological warfare tactic. They noted that the US air warning system relied on radar and visual observation, and that a coordinated attack alongside a surge of UFO reports could overwhelm the system. Currently, I think the occult has surfaced through the cyber domain. You know, if we go back to the Snowden revelations, hidden among the avalanche of documents that he leaked, there were images from a PowerPoint presentation that said, so if the intelligence community or if the US government admitted that there were extraterrestrial life or that the UFOs were somehow linked to that, then there are questions about the implications of that and how that threatens the US sovereignty, the government sovereignty. They try to stop that from spreading because it can threaten basically the status quo and their political and economic power.
Why would these visitors, and some of them are, to my mind, simply that? Why would they come here in the first place? Why? We're on the distant edges of the Milky Way. Why? All the big guns are in the middle somewhere where there's no darkness. The stars are so large and bright, everything is perpetual daylight. So what, billions and billions and trillions of years older than us, what would a being from that particular matrix, what interest could they possibly have in us? Every single episode of this show that's broadcast is a threat. These questions are a threat. You two are a threat. I'm a threat, bewilderingly. Daniele's a threat. And yet you've got to start asking why and who's doing this and what are they gaining by trying to stop these types of conversation.
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
It's going to be more jarring for most people to realize that their government has been lying to them for almost 100 years than it is for the fact that non-human intelligence is interacting with the human species for a very long time. Welcome, one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is Universal Disclosure, meeting the moment. My name is Mike, an active UFO/UAP field investigator in Southern California, with my friend and co-host,
Reverend Stu in Melbourne, Australia.
Reverend Stu, how's it going today?
It's going pretty well. I've been wondering if we should perhaps sell some drone repellent in our merch store.
Oh, that's awesome. We don't have a merch store yet. Maybe we'll get one soon, right? But that would be probably a top seller. These silly drones have been making the news all over the place, and we did sort of an emergency episode in a way that wasn't planned. Unfortunately, you weren't there due to technical reasons, but we laid out with a couple of my co-investigators here in SoCal the fact that these are not alien in nature. Maybe you can legitimately say UFO or UAP because it's unidentified, even though, but I don't even think that, because we've identified it as a drone, so therefore it is identified. The only thing unidentified is who owns them and what they're doing. But nonetheless, definitely not ET.
That's been really fascinating. That was a good episode you shot there, Mike, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to participate due to technical issues. But I've been hearing a lot of perspectives on this drone subject, and I even heard President Trump saying that the military know what they are and where they're coming from.
Oh, without question, they know everything. But in any event, what we're doing here is like a little bridge episode from where we left off to where we're going, and I can't think of a better way to do that than to talk about the intelligence apparatus. It's also very timely in a way. It's very fitting to what's going on right now. And with that, though, I've heard some comments that we maybe do too much couch talk here. So we're just going to let's get right down into it.
All right, let's do this.
So let's bring in our guests, Daniele Irandoost and Reverend David William Parry. All right, so gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us and spending some time with us today. And if we could start with you, Daniele, if you could maybe just give us a quick overview of who you are and why our audience should be interested in what you have to say.
Good morning or good evening, good afternoon to everyone. Well, first of all, let me thank you for inviting me to speak on your podcast show. It's really an honor to share my insights and expertise with your audience. So I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. I've been studying the field of intelligence or espionage for the past 10 years, so for about a decade now, as a scholar, basically. I've met a couple of intelligence operatives. I've met the head of GCHQ. He spoke in one of my TEDx Lambeth events, Sir David Omand, who was the head of GCHQ, basically the United Kingdom's NSA. I've written 2 books on espionage. My first book on espionage was published last year, called A New Vision of Spycraft, and I've got a second book on espionage called Rahab's House of Spies. So, I've studied this field of spycraft basically for about 10 years now, and have written articles on that as well. Currently, I'm doing my research on oversight of intelligence in the United Kingdom, and comparing how that works with oversight in Africa, in 3 countries in Africa. So, yeah, I mean, I've when I was a teenager, I wanted to become a spy. So that's how it all started.
That's great. We're definitely going to have some questions for you, especially with everything going on in the world today. And it's very much relevant, I think. For sure. So Reverend David Parry, you are becoming a frequent contributor here, and we do welcome and love that. If you could just sort of remind everybody out there a little bit about your background real quick.
I'm a short, fat, theatrical puff. I'm the Reverend Dr. David William Parry. My background is actually moral theology, so not much to do with all this. I'm also a passionate impresario in British theatre. I've written 4 books, mostly heavy literature that touches upon anomalous phenomena. I'm an experiencer with regards to the phenomena. And I'm also someone fitting the pieces together. I confess, even though I'm a serial experiencer, I suppose that's the way it's put nowadays, isn't it? I tend to further explore these matters as a high road around modernism, which I think needs to be done. I think the whole modernist enterprise, rather like the postmodernist, so I'm not being medieval, there's something wrong with that. There's something one-dimensional in that. There's something leading us to a clear but not accurate picture of humanity. And therefore, this is one of the ways, these are some of the topics I use to explore how we get round that to arrive at an even deeper view of life. Therefore, ufology for me isn't simply a wham bam, thank you, ma'am, wasn't that an amazing trip sort of thing, which it is. But it's also it also raises a number of incredibly important questions, not only about our lives as they are in the world, our histories, and I don't mean ancient alien stuff, whatever that is. I'm really skeptical about all of that. Our lives, our histories, hidden and otherwise. I'm not denying all of it's clear, as well as our place in the universe and where we go from here. I suppose, for instance, the next couple of books I'm writing will not be to do with ufology, but I know I've got something I've got to contribute to that on a more conscious level at some appropriate time. Why am I saying that? Then I'll shut up. Is one of the people that influences me on a sort of psychodynamic level is Roberto Assagioli. I think everyone interested in UFOs, ufology is meant to say Carl Jung. Gigantic name, gigantic name. And I still think his book, Flying Saucers, is probably one of the most underrated contributions in human history. Everyone likes flirting with the title because of his name and his kudos, but they don't actually like looking at what he said, or indeed haven't bothered to read it. I suspect, however, that's Jung basically fitting the phenomena into the wider range of his type of psychoanalysis, his type of analytical psychology in that particular case. Forgive me. I think there's a much more interesting guy, Roberto Assagioli, who he knew Freud, he knew Jung. And I noticed one of the comments Stuart pointed out to me on one of my previous dalliances with the show was there is no magic. I mean, has the guy ever heard of psychology? Um, you know, what do you mean? So the minute we're looking at that aspect, and as I said to you previously, anyone that thinks psychology is unreal probably needs to be on the funny farm now, because they're denying their own sanity. They're denying something innate about their own humanity. Assagioli was the founder of psychosynthesis. He was deeply involved in somehow in some way with the whole New Age movement at the beginning when it had a lot to say. It doesn't seem to have a lot to say now. It had a lot to say back then. With Alice Bailey, the Fenton Foundation, and all those sorts of things. And he used to attend some of her seances, for want of a better word. And his system of engaging with the human psyche, the human person, seems to be something to do with the ageless wisdom itself and de facto the UFO phenomena. Therefore, that's the direction I'd be coming from and need to look into, not only personally myself. I have the deepest respect for psychosynthesis. Is that the next step forward? Is that really where we're all meant to be looking? But that would be my contribution on a personal level to the field. That's not just simply looking for ways around modernism. All right, shut up, David. I used to love all those things myself, and we were sort of talking about something similar off air. The silvery UFO lands and the legs come out and the struts come out and somebody gets out and gives us a wave, always wearing a helmet, then they always take it off. Oh my God, you're so handsome, that sort of thing. And and I used to love old American sci-fi, Outer Limits, and all that sort of stuff. The Twilight Zone, although that was more complex. And there'd always be an alien with that sort of voice. And great stuff, great stuff. But they're always the couple in the futuristic car driving towards. Why are all the cities in the future so ugly? Driving towards this ugly metropolis with a robot in the back being sassy. Great, 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 but monstrous. But monstrous. Is that all we are? Bags of chemicals in a completely definable universe? No, because it can't be defined. It can't be defined. It can't be defined. So, I suspect ufology has an incredibly serious part to play. Not only, how about this for portentous, in the further discussions of our whole cultural future? I believe that. Wow. But also me personally, because it's reminding us all, me particularly, that the esoteric is psychology at the deepest of all depths. It's psychoanalysis at the deepest of all depths, and those depths impinge upon our nuts and bolts reality. What we perceive to be the physical real is very easily subsumed into all of that. So this show in particular, I'm going to give everyone a big, big, big boost. I think is vital. The conversation is moving in a particular direction, very, very wisely. The sorts of questions that are being asked are the correct questions. Lots of ufologists are not doing that. They're back in the 1950s. Was there radiation? Your watch has stopped. Are we missing 7 minutes? Oh, give me a break. So great stuff, great stuff, great stuff. Not really answering any of the mysteries of the universe. And shows like this are saying all of that is great stuff. Even Reverend David thinks it's great stuff. But there's this whole level of chocolates underneath that are now being suggested, and they're they're so important we ignore them at our peril. The whole Wetico thing. I think you two have come across that. What was it, Paul Levy? Paul Levy. Um, you've got to get him on the show. This sort of mind virus that's infecting humanity, the powers of evil, our own evils, are now so unchecked. Whatever happened to the church, Stuart? Don't. I know we mustn't raise that issue. We'll be here for days. Who is countering those dark forces? Pure materialism. Is it really good? The pure, I will do what I want to do in a universe I can carve up. Is it really the correct picture? Ufology is one of the few topics that's not challenging that directly, although one day it might. It's saying, hang on, there are other depths here, there are other dimensions, pun intended. And that cannot, that's at the top of our cultural and moral discourse, as far as I can see. So that's me, short, fat, malcontent, cleric, author, in love with theatre, and I'm just a man that likes a good script.
Awesome. Thank you. I think a lot of what's happening, or the confusion that's out there, has a lot to do with the intelligence community, the intelligence apparatus, and that's what we're here to really delve into. So, with Daniele and Reverend Stu, you want to take it away?
Yeah, well, one of my questions, please, is I heard a member of the intelligence community say once, if an influential individual can be compromised, it may as well be our organisation that compromises them rather than a foreign power. Compromising and blackmailing individuals seems to be an integral function of the intelligence community. What are your thoughts on this comment and observation, please?
It's interesting how foreign citizens might become agents for the, let's say the US government. There are so many different reasons behind it. For some, it might be ethical concerns about their own governments, while others might be sort of, they might feel drawn in by the thrill of adventure and secrecy. There's also the lure of money, or even the pressure of blackmail, like you said, sexually or otherwise. Others might be driven by their ideology, or sense of duty. I mean, I can think of the Cambridge Five, for example. They were communists. They were against the whole sort of the capitalist enterprise. It's fascinating how some agents can be cornered into becoming spies. They might face proof of past crimes and be blackmailed into compliance to keep that evidence from the police or, from the public eyes. While motivations like money or ideology can play a role, blackmail often proves to be one of the strongest levers for turning someone into a mole, basically. So and it really adds a dark twist to the whole persuasion game. That method is questionable ethically, and also there are questions about its effectiveness. I remember going to an event at the Royal RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, which is one of the, which is probably the world's oldest and the UK's leading defence and security think tank. And there was a British spy there who was among the audience, and he asked a question, or he made a comment, he made an observation during the event, and he said that during the Cold War, the intelligence agencies had to show that they were trustworthy, so that if there were foreign informers, or foreign moles, agents, potential ones, that they would be able to trust the intelligence agencies and give them the information. So in other words, if a foreign agent didn't have trust in the in MI6 or the CIA, for example, then they might not be willing to do that. So whether blackmail as a method of intelligence gathering or human intelligence is effective is very questionable. But I mean, there are cases in the past. I think this sort of thing has happened a lot in America, and probably in the former Soviet Union, and it's more likely to happen in sort of totalitarian countries, I'd say.
It was an American who I heard say that, so it's quite interesting what you said about that. When I heard that statement, which I just recounted to you, I was appalled, but I also understood the rationale and the logic behind it. Also wanted to ask you, and you just touched on it then, why do you think intelligence assets appear to be so active in the disclosure or non-disclosure of UAPs and UFOs at the moment?
Well, so during the Cold War, the U.S. intelligence agencies were involved with the UFO phenomena. So there were intelligence officers, for example, within Project Blue Book and also outside Project Blue Book, that shared this perspective. So in August 1952, the CIA produced 3 briefing papers aimed at evaluating the Air Force's UFO study and its implications for intelligence. So during the Cold War, the CIA was concerned that the UFO sightings could be utilized by the Soviets as a psychological warfare tactic. They noted that the US air warning system relied on radar and visual observation, and that a coordinated attack alongside a surge of UFO reports could overwhelm the system. Their paper concluded that, while the Air Force study was valid, further investigation into psychological warfare implications was necessary. So, although UFOs were not considered a direct threat, panelists agreed that hostile nations could exploit UFO reports to disrupt air defense communication or undermine trust in the government, which I think has happened. They recommended that the government, demystify UFOs and educate the public to recognize genuine signs of hostile intent. But and then later on, during the 1970s and 80s, the agency produced documents on counterintelligence aspects of UFOs, including concerns about Soviet use of UFOs to gather intelligence on stealth aircraft. Ex-Captain Ruppelt was among the first whistleblowers, revealing hidden government activities related to UFOs, which challenged the official stance and supported theories of extraterrestrial involvement and cover-ups. So there's been a long history of intelligence involvement and the UFO phenomena. The Captain Ruppelt, he discussed the schism in Project Sign. That was also related to Project Blue Book. I'd like to think of that as the X-Files. So, regarding UFOs as alien spacecraft, he noted that some Air Force intelligence officers supported this view as well. So people within the intelligence community believed that there were, extraterrestrial involvement. But obviously, we can't say that for sure. But he speculated that, as head of Blue Book, that they might actually be an unwitting front for a more covert UFO intelligence project. Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillen-Cotter, former CIA director, was also a significant board member of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And when that ended, we had MUFON and other UFO organizations that came along. So there's been a sort of a long history of interconnection between those two fields. I think there's a lot of PSYOP going on with the UFO phenomena and intelligence agencies. So I think there's a lot of disinformation that comes out of the way that intelligence agencies try and frame how UFOs are seen by the public. So so there are historical relations, and there's a historical background to this out of the Cold War.
Thank you. The character of James Bond is ostensibly based on John Dee, a mathematician, mystic courtier, and possibly a spy for Queen Elizabeth I, who would sign his name as 007, which was actually a depiction of a lorgnette, when sending code a message back to her. So I wanted to ask you, is this mystical layer still present in the modern intelligence community that you're aware of?
I think this is probably one of the most interesting areas in the field of intelligence that's hardly touched upon. But the evidence is there and can be accessed in the archives. There's always been a link between spying and the occult. It's been explored in both fiction and real life. There's a novel called They Use Dark Forces by Dennis Wheatley, which tells the story of British and Nazi magicians fighting to end the Second World War. Some believe that Aleister Crowley, the famous occultist, worked for British intelligence during World War I. His character inspired McCarthy and Dennis Wheatley's 1934 novel, The Devil Rides Out. Wheatley himself worked for the London Controlling Section, which was a secret department responsible for coordinating strategic military deception during the Second World War. He was involved in planning for D-Day and potentially Operation Mincemeat, one of the most impressive military deceptions in history. And, we've got Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, 007, who was also part of naval intelligence. He drew inspiration from his experiences for his character James Bond. And it's interesting that John Dee signed his confidential correspondence to Queen Elizabeth using the two circles, which symbolized that he was the Queen's secret eyes, and that was guarded with a root sign. I'd have to think about that. So intelligence and the occult are closely related. If we look at it in loose terms, spies are always on the quest to break down the barriers between what's known and what's unknown and reveal the hidden truth. It's also heavily involved in wild looking glass war taking place in a sort of wilderness of mirrors. The CIA and FBI, MI5 agents experimented with parapsychology and LSD for the same purposes during the Cold War. I'm not entirely sure whether that's still going on, but it's evolved from that sort of traditional way of how the occult works, I think. I'll get to that in a second. They've attempted previously to employ esoteric knowledge, if you like. For 20 years, the US Army, then the Defense Intelligence Agency, and finally the CIA sponsored teams of remote viewers as part of their more esoteric intelligence collection arsenal. They didn't get involved, without millions of dollars in testing by prestigious academic research units like the Stanford Research Institute. But currently, I think the occult has surfaced through the cyber domain. If we go back to the Snowden revelations, hidden among the avalanche of documents that he leaked, there were images from a PowerPoint presentation that said, that showed a shot of hands shuffling a deck of cards. And it said, we want to build cyber magicians. And I think that's a very important observation today, because I think that's how the evolution between the occult and intelligence has happened. I think it's in the infusion with the cyber domain. And that's one of the reasons why, if anyone wants to increase their chances of being accepted into the intelligence community nowadays, I think they'd have to spend a lot of time learning about softwares and how to analyze data. So I think it's changed from that, the traditional way of how the occult works. I think it's turned into the cyber domain, and I think that's that's partly a dark magic, I think, so the dark arts of technology.
Well, with that said, who do the intelligence agencies ultimately work for?
Wow, that's a great question. So consumers, the intelligence consumers might include policymakers, members of the intelligence community itself, overseers, such as congressional committee members, or in the United States, it could be the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. That's the obvious answer. The superficial answer. Policymakers.
What's the real answer?
I think I mentioned the cyber domain, and I think if we look behind that, we'd see that a lot of corporations are behind that element. So I'd like to mention Shoshana Zuboff, who wrote a book called Surveillance Capitalism. So she discusses surveillance capitalism, and she talks a lot about how big tech companies like Google, Facebook, Meta, and Twitter, and so on, all these corporations that are behind surveillance nowadays, they have a lot of influence within government. And, you find a lot of former intelligence operatives, analysts working for these same organizations when they leave the CIA, the FBI, or the NSA, for example. So all of these, there's a lot of interconnection between the government organizations and corporations. And I'd say that ultimately the intelligence agencies work for these organizations, but nowadays. So I don't think I think there's a lot of talk about how there's a sort of a secret government club, basically, that's all intelligence related, or that's covered up. You come across that in X-Files, for example. The smoking man. I think in reality it's the corporations. So
that's interesting. So I'm just kind of curious then, is the intelligence protocol the same across the world, or does it sort of fluctuate based on countries, or democracy versus monarchy versus communist? Like, does everybody follow the same rules, or is it sort of everybody does what they do?
Well, I think there exists at least one recognizable difference between respective intelligence cultures. Yeah, it varies. I mean, the British intelligence community is different to the American intelligence community. I mean, there's the hierarchy in the British intelligence community is organized very differently. It's more hierarchical. In America, the intelligence agencies are more independent, I think, and obviously they've got a huge budget. I mean, there's Sir David Omand, who I mentioned earlier, the head of GCHQ, once said that we in the British intelligence community, we're the brains, and the Americans have the money. So,
Sorry, Mike.
I don't think that's true. I think that's just Oxbridge, Oxford and Cambridge fantasy. I don't think that's true at all. But yeah, I mean, that's I think there's a lot of there's a huge difference between the intelligence communities around the world. And yeah, I mean, the communist intelligence agencies, for example, historical texts about the work of spies and how intelligence worked in, for example, the former Soviet Union. There's a lot of there's evidence that Stalin, for example, used politicized intelligence. In other words, he used it for his own personal gain. So I'm studying the African intelligence communities at the moment, and I come across a lot of corruption. For example, politicians use the intelligence agencies to silence their opponents, their political opponents. And that's happened in South Africa, for example. And that came out recently that there was a huge scandal, and the former president was actually sort of had to resign. So, yeah, I mean, it really depends on how intelligence, on the history of the country, on their political, setup. And all I can say is that no intelligence agency in the world is, I think, that is good. I don't think they are at all. By definition, I don't think they can have a, you can't say they work for good. So,
Well, the intelligence community is demonstrably involved in meddling in elections and assassinations of world leaders. President Trump's been actively working towards releasing classified intelligence relating to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. According to Trump, numerous personnel have advocated for him not to release this information. What are your thoughts on this situation?
With Kennedy, he was actually, there's some evidence to suggest that he was afraid to appear ignorant, and was therefore easily kept in the dark. The CIA had actually a psychological profile on him. So it raises classical questions, of intelligence and their work. The CIA, the FBI, and even the KGB knew about Lee Harvey Oswald, the president's accused assassin, an interest which is newly documented and analyzed in 4 books. I can mention them if you like. But in the 88% of the estimated files have been released on the Kennedy assassination. However, there are 11% that 11% of that have removed sensitive portions of them. So they've been redacted. 11% of information have been redacted, and the CIA has illegally destroyed others. But at least 15,000, I think, remain unpublished, according to the National Archives. The status of these files seem unlikely to change. President Trump tweeted his intent to release the remaining files, days before the 25-year deadline. in October 2017, and he succumbed to last-minute pressure from the CIA and FBI and issued an executive order approving a 6-month delay. And in 2018, he extended the delay by 4 years, citing the JFK Act's provision for withholding documents that pose an identifiable threat to national security. And then 4 years later, Biden cited the same clause to postpone the release of the documents, postponed the release, I think, to 2022, claiming the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted a final review, which had ostensibly started years ago. So, after countless revelations of government crimes and cover-ups, the Pentagon Papers, the Watergate scandal, the Church and Pike committees, the Iran-Contra, Chelsea Manning's Afghanistan diaries, WikiLeaks, Iraq war logs, the Snowden revelations, and the drone papers. These are the most publicized scandals that have happened in the history of the U.S. intelligence community. It's disingenuous to place the blame for mass disaffection solely on conspiracy theorists rather than these American institutions. So, as we now know, the government, especially the CIA and the FBI, have distorted Kennedy's life and death. They destroyed evidence, such as tapes of Lee Harvey Oswald from September 1963. They intimidated witnesses like Sylvia Duran, who was Oswald's Cuban embassy contact, and deceived federal investigators, for instance, by concealing Operation Mongoose, which was sort of a plan to assassinate Fidel Castro. So not even President Johnson, who commissioned the Warren Report in 1963, accepted those conclusions, so that Oswald was the lone assassin. So this effort to muddle the truth, I think, has created a national conscience filled by conspiracy theories, and basically it's bereft of any clear thought. And yeah, I mean, the intelligence community needs to be blamed for that.
And my next question is a bit sensitive, and I wondered whether to include it, but my understanding is the Mafia are used as proxies by the intelligence community. Apparently the Mafia perform domestic hits or wet work on behalf of agencies in return for immunity, as agencies are not officially permitted to action domestic hits. What are your thoughts on this arrangement?
I think that's a great question. If I'm, well, I mean, historically, I mentioned Fidel Castro early on, the Operation Mongoose. So when the CIA and the American intelligence community decided to eliminate him, plausible deniability became their central to their plan. The CIA needed to avoid any links to the assassination attempt. So, they were considering chemical and biological weapons. They thought that, those weapons were ideal for the purpose, with delivery entrusted to third parties. They also thought of Mafia hitmen and even Castro's lover. So, yeah, I mean, the Church Committee in the 70s hearings, they revealed that the CIA attempted to hire the Mafia for a contract killing. Now, so yeah, I mean, there's truth to that. I think nowadays, what I'm inclined to say is that the intelligence community is the Mafia. So what we find nowadays is spies, former intelligence operatives, when they leave the intelligence agencies, they either start their own private intelligence organizations, or they join previously established one. And there's been a few scandals where the intelligence organizations like, MI6 or CIA, they contract work to these private organizations. And, because of oversight limitations, because, congressional hearings or parliamentary committees can't really oversee the work of private organizations, they're more likely to undertake questionable actions, questionable methods of intelligence gathering, espionage, or even covert action. So I think the intelligence community, intelligence agencies nowadays, they're the mafia now.
I see what you're saying. It's the same model, only it's actual companies taking care of that work. I also wanted to mention this. According to the Oxford Dictionary, the definition of secret society is a group or organization that keeps its activities, events, inner workings, or membership a secret from non-members. I would assert that intelligence agencies are secret societies. Would you concur?
Well, in the case of intelligence agencies, we presume they rely on reason and science to protect the national interest. By contrast, the general view of secret societies and occult groups is that they engage in rituals and practices that might have little or nothing to do with normal, social intercourse, But I think there are many similarities between intelligence agencies and secret societies, such as Freemasonic and Rosicrucian orders. Both of these groups utilize mystique to get their work done while keeping it shrouded in secrecy, which hides and reveals at the same time. So incidentally, there are a few exposés that have confirmed this. In the 1980s, a book by Peter Wright was published in Australia, which caused a huge scandal and outrage in the British Parliament. Thatcher, the Prime Minister at the time, she wanted to stop the publication of the book because apparently there were too many truths in it. To give a bit of context, Peter Wright worked for MI5 and MI6. In his book, he makes strong accusations about the way the British intelligence community works in practice. He says that they're often middle-class men, the old boy network, who went to Oxbridge and Cambridge and are members of private gentlemen's clubs in Pall Mall, or that they're Freemasons. He also said that the head of MI5 was a Soviet spy, but that's another thing. So in a way, it could be said that, Peter Wright, as the Edward Snowden of the last century in the UK, was confirming that there are a lot of similarities between the two. So yeah, I mean, the intelligence work and the operations of secret societies are shown to overlap in 5 categories. I think, perhaps the religious underpinnings, the occult practices to control the mind, and I think that relates to psyops, psychological warfare. Cryptography is another thing. As we know, that's a very sort of closely involved thing. John Dee's book was written in ciphers. You'd have to decode it first to understand what it says. And violations of social convention and cryptic transparency, and the ability to carry out secret activities in plain sight. So,
wow, that was very well stated, Daniele. Thank you.
This is all definitely interconnected, but I want to bring it back a little bit more on point, so to speak, with our larger topic of UAPs, commonly referred to as UFOs. Daniele, have you encountered any specific rules as to how intelligence agencies treat UAPs?
Well, I mentioned earlier that the intelligence community, for example, the CIA, they've been very concerned about psychological warfare. So what they try and do is basically spread disinformation or propaganda in order to keep people's focus away from what's really going on. I read an article recently about sovereignty. So if you think about how sovereignty works nowadays, in political science, for example, there are questions about how the UFO phenomena can threaten that. So if the intelligence community or if the US government admitted that there were extraterrestrial life or that the UFOs were somehow linked to that, then there are questions about the implications of that and how that threatens the US sovereignty, the government sovereignty. So the intelligence community in America and probably other countries, they try to stop that from spreading because it can threaten basically the status quo and their political and economic power. So I think that's, let's look into, NASA, because, they're trying to find out life on other planets. They're using telescopes. They're spending billions of dollars on that. But if there's evidence that the aliens or, extraterrestrial life is here, why not spend more money trying to see if they're here already? So there are a lot of contradictions going on, and I think the intelligence community doesn't want these questions asked because ultimately it would threaten their power, the government's power or the corporation's power, basically. Then the whole modern enterprise of the nation state would come under question. So I think the intelligence communities are playing a very smart game in terms of how to spread disinformation, give contradictory answers, maybe release some footage now and then say these sightings are just drones. So I'd say they're involved in disinformation propaganda.
Yeah, I think perfect ending, I guess, to that question, right? Because we're currently, at the time of this recording anyway, going through this drone-orama here with they're suddenly appearing all over the place now, and I have to wonder, like, why now, right? The disclosure movement is carrying on quite well, and suddenly all these drones appear. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, that's just a thought. So with Roswell, New Mexico, as an example, and then echoed by the Westall, Australia incidents, they both had reports of what people call like the Men in Black, trying to either convince the witness they didn't see what they thought they saw, or to keep quiet for their country's own good. I mean, you sort of answered it already, but is that consistent with how the intelligence community or apparatus would handle a sighting of significant nature?
I think there's a link there. The Men in Black, they're sort of like, they remind me of the surveillance apparatus. They remind me of discipline and punishment. I think they're used, they give the impression, there's the impression that they know everything, that they can surveil what's happening, and they can use their anonymous identity and their sort of, they haven't got a face, basically. You can't identify who they are. You don't know how to approach them or how to basically defend yourself against them. So it reminds me a lot of how surveillance works. You're always under observation, and if you do something wrong or if you learn a secret, for example, then they turn up and try to either discipline you or punish you into secrecy. So, I mean, I can't think of specific examples at the moment, but I think there's a relation. There's a clear relation there.
Okay, I can see that.
So, Reverend David, I wanted to ask you, because when I think it was our very first conversation with you, you had mentioned that you had seen a flying saucer in the schoolyard, and I didn't really delve too much into it at the time, but I think you said like the teachers basically said, "Oh, enough about those flying saucers." But did the Men in Black ever show up to that or after that and tell you all to keep quiet, or that you didn't see what you saw?
I've got to say a few things before I answer that wonderful question. Isn't he wonderful? I know I'm biased, but isn't Daniele wonderful?
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
been
Yes.
fantastic.
My trouble with a poor script is that everything has to be scripted. I'm going to answer for once in a slightly more sober fashion. My background. I'm the Reverend Monsignor, therefore I'm a senior priest with the Old Catholic Apostolic Church. I'm the author of over 70 publications, and I'm just about to be awarded my second doctorate. Why am I saying that? If all we're looking at is a government agency frightening people, and I don't doubt that happens, but maybe that's not the whole point of the Men in Black. Maybe there's something else there. Then yes, X happens, weird stuff goes on, the government turns up, shut it or else, the end. But the Men in Black, when those stories started, were barely human. That seems to be forgotten nowadays. They were strangely pale, if not blanched white. They couldn't hold on to a situation for long. Other steam would sometimes literally come from them. They needed glasses of water unless they were overcome with something. They were barely human. Those stories have changed. And if we're actually talking about something Manichaean, there are forces of light appearing in these glorious orbs, these silvery objects. Surely the forces of darkness would also turn up to try and counter that situation. There's now too much light in the world. We're going to try and oppose that. So the answer would be, if there was no such thing as karma, higher bodies, if the whole thing was one dimensional and only nuts and bolts in a nuts and bolt universe, then yes, government agencies would come along and suppress information. But just supposing those other things are true and everyone is at a different spiritual level, and these other forces know that, and maybe the karma of a situation is so complex that they wouldn't be able to interfere. Therefore, they'd want to interfere, but they can't. The karma of a particular group, some shooting off to the stars, others going in a normal direction, would disable that as an option for these dark forces. They simply wouldn't be able to. Therefore, if we're looking at a one-dimensional nuts and bolts universe, which we simply aren't, and actually, yeah, the teachers were very clear. As I say, I've never forgotten it, because it destroyed my belief in education, mainstream education that day. We don't. I quote, after all these years, we don't want any more talk of UFOs. The end. And we were kids, therefore no, we all got on with our lessons. We thought it was wrong and we thought it was ridiculous, but we all got on with our lessons. No government agency or no Men in Black turned up, but for the reasons I've just outlined. If they were simply human beings working on the control of information, which I've no doubt happens, by the way. I think the Men in Black phenomena, again, it's lots of different things rolled into one ball. The real Men in Black, the ones that still occasionally turn up, that make bewilderingly strange statements, and then go, and everybody's left wondering what the hell has just happened. They don't think, now I'm intimidated by a G-man. That's the American term, isn't it? Some beefy guy that used to play college football is gunning for me. That's not what they used to say. I've only seen one bit of footage, and I don't spend my time trawling the internet, but I've only seen one bit of footage that was meant to be about, of Men in Black that actually looked like Men in Black. They were so pale it was untrue. They moved with such a bewildering gait. Everybody noticed them in the lobby of the place they were walking through. And apparently, to follow on the story from that particular clip, they turned up, asked weird questions like, "Have you seen a UFO?" And the people have all said yes. Then they left. You're looking at something deeper and darker and much more complex. Let's work on the premise. If I'm going on too long, shut me up. Let's work on the premise that not everyone is on the same spiritual level. Something I detest as an idea. I'm an old-fashioned libertarian, not the way that word is being used in America at the moment. I think that's been kidnapped by a certain group for certain reasons. I like believing in human equality and human liberty, but one of the most ancient ideas in the world, shared by all the great religions in different forms, is that we're not all equal. Some are beginning their spiritual journey, they're young souls. Others are finishing their spiritual journey. They've been here time and time and time again, and there's no need for them to stay. Therefore, human beings simply aren't looking at the world in the same way from the same level. It's incredibly complicated. Then we get to the idea of different bodies. I mean, I brought that up before. Sort of we've astral bodies, we've etheric bodies, all of which can operate independently of each other. There's always a link. There's always these magical threads, metaphorical or otherwise, but they can act independently. Therefore, what really is being addressed by the UFO phenomena, and what would the Men in Black be trying to oppose? Which body are they trying to work on? To answer the guy that doesn't believe in magic again, it's not here. Is there any magic on this world? No. There we are. The paranormal can happen here because look at the word itself. Quasi-normal, partially normal, an extension of the sensorium that we all live in. Therefore, telepathy is conceivable, precognition is conceivable, none of which is occultism. It can be used in an occult fashion, but none of it is occultism. If I want to, or if somebody wants to work an act of magic, the first thing they will do is prepare all they need on the astral realm and let it trickle down to this one. There is no magic here, but that doesn't mean there aren't magical effects here. So these entities may not even be addressing the physical body or the physical phenomena. I mean, what is it they actually don't want discussed? I find that fascinating. They don't want the intrusion of freedom, transcendence, the fact there might be more to life than we think. There's more than the nuts and bolts around us. You are a complex, beautiful spiritual being with all of these facets and dimensions. That's exactly what they don't want discussed. So all of a sudden, to my mind, excuse me, we're looking at much more than a government agency, because look at what it's trying to oppose and the way it's trying to oppose it. And the real Men in Black are nearly incapable of doing that. They try hard, but they can't. They can't because of what they're dealing with. How about that for a long-winded answer? Any thoughts?
That was fascinating.
That's fantastic.
So no, I mean, no Men in Black turned up because simply they couldn't on that occasion. The karma, the collective karma of the situation wouldn't have allowed that to occur. And that, by the way, is why Men in Black don't always turn up. Sometimes they can't. The forces of transcendence, or the astral body of somebody, or the etheric body of somebody, is simply too powerful for them to deal with. I mean, right, getting back to occultism, then I will shut up. Not all the same bodies are at the same level of development, they say. And certainly the birth of the physical body gives birth to the embryo of an astral body, which gives birth to the embryo of an etheric body, and so on and so on and so on. Remember, there are meant to be 7 bodies in all. But it doesn't always work that way, because of the world and the way it is, the traumas of life, the sadnesses, the delights. Sometimes a different body to our own physical body is much more active and healthy and complete than this one. It's easy to imagine someone in a wheelchair um, actually focusing those energies to a different part of themselves. Most people would put that down to fantasy, and a lot of the time it is. But maybe it's also not entirely that. They're working on a different body where that isn't necessary. They get motion in a different way. We've got to. Why is ufology so important for me? Because it opens up questions like this.
Mm.
What are we as human beings? So, why would these visitors, and some of them are, to my mind, simply that? Why would they come here in the first place? Why? We're on the distant edges of the Milky Way. Why? All the big guns are in the middle somewhere where there's no darkness. The stars are so large and bright, everything is perpetual daylight. So what, billions and billions and trillions of years older than us, what would a being from that particular matrix, what interest could they possibly have in us? You know, uh, uh, why? But things allegedly come here from other dimensions or not. They take an interest in us for whatever reason, and they move on. And nobody, as usual, is asking the right question. In my humble mind, why? Why would that happen? How do they benefit? What's it got to do with them? The bit that always amuses me in ufology circles, the endless survey. God's sake, get it done and dusted. Give yourselves a break. Because human beings can do that now, why can't they do it? And they can't do it because that's not what they're doing. One of the government agencies, Daniele's the expert, not me. The 100% thing I agree on is, what are they afraid of? The implications of this subject. The implications of Move On. I bet they hate Move On. The implications of Stewart being a minister. The implications of discussions like this. Because all of a sudden, big questions are on the table. I used to watch sometimes, I don't spend a lot of time, shame on me perhaps, watching UFO Hunter, the theatricality, it was a show, UFO Hunters, the theatricality of the show was always so wonderful. You get the guy, I can't remember his name, who believes absolutely everything. You stubbed your toe and a UFO caused it. He's running around the world interviewing people. What did you think of this? Then you always get the skeptic. If an alien's patting him on the shoulder, he doesn't believe it. It's great theatre. The one episode I did see that caught my attention, and which I thought probably was the most important thing they ever did, was a very rich guy on a yacht who'd seen a UFO, excuse me, and wished he hadn't seen it. Oh, bullseye.
Yeah.
Bullseye. Because all of a sudden, you're in a bigger world that you can't control. There are forces and energies way beyond you and your corporation and your little lives and your little dreams, which is exactly what he didn't want. And that's why these shows, ufology, Move On, and the rest of it, at the moment they want to ridicule drones. There were no drones 40 years ago, so talk about drones back then. I noticed the whole of that phenomena is being geared towards drones. There were no drones once. There were no drones during World War II and the Foo Fighters. Save it, please. So it's all about aggregates, isn't it? How many people will not really think about these issues and go for that story? Every single episode of this show that's broadcast is a threat. These questions are a threat. You two are a threat. I'm a threat, bewilderingly. Daniele's a threat. And you've got to start asking why and who's doing this and what are they gaining by trying to stop these types of conversation. I think the footsteps of visitors, the glittering footsteps of those others, on every continent, in every time period, they surround us. And that's the sort of knowledge that these people don't want.
Well said. We've had our challenges for sure, getting some of these conversations out there. There have been times that I needed to change specific words and titles and or images to allow them to be put out. There's definitely some censorship happening for sure. And I was really shocked at first because when I sort of started on this journey with Stuart doing this, I wasn't expecting that to happen at all. And it did almost right away, and it happened multiple times. Just a couple episodes ago too again. So, I mean, yeah, for sure. Yeah, well said.
Well, what do I make of David Icke? I never know what I make of David Icke. I mean, I was, believe it or not, one of the directors with the People's Voice, his TV channel. I was, first in, last in, first out. So I was one of the directors with art at the People's Voice, of course, darling. And I got some films made. They were actually broadcast eventually on Inlight TV. One of my dear friends, the Anglo-Saxon poet Andrew Ray, we managed to do a lot of his poetry. We did a play. That footage has gone missing because remember when that terrestrial channel collapsed, everybody was suing everybody. Please go gracefully. None of them decided to go gracefully, and it was right. This will get me into trouble. I mean, I know Sonia. I sort of have come across Ike Boy, but I don't really know him. Sonia, after the collapse, because of course litigation is flying left, right, and centre. The world's inherited that American habit, Mike. There we are. We're all in litigation now. She suddenly appeared on YouTube. Oh, David, you keep talking about unconditional love, but where is it? Where is it? And a couple of days later, because he's not the sort of person to let that red rag pass a ball, a couple of days later, he's on the morning breakfast show of what's left of the People's Voice, talking to that weird Irish guy. I can never remember his name. And they're looking through the morning papers, and he says it got no connection with the rest of the show whatsoever. Just, yes, dark powers are trying to stop my work. Right? You mean Sonia, don't you? Right? I mean, so there's dark power. There's a funny side to all this, which I love exploring. We don't look enough at the funny side of life in a world that can be dark and desperate and despairing. Let's look at it more. We're creatures of mirth and joy and humour. What is wrong with that? And also, some people behave ridiculously, and that's a case in point. It doesn't surprise me that this show has had problems. It will have increasing problems because they don't want these discussions. Wouldn't it be better somebody somewhere is already saying, if the Disclosure Project collapsed, somebody somewhere is already saying that. And you've got to start asking why? What's this show? I imagine you've not got the biggest budget in the world, with a modest budget, with earnest people, good, decent people asking fair-minded questions. Why is that a threat? Why would that have any sort of resistance, which it does? So I don't know what I make of Ike Boy. I mean, the bloody intergalactic lizards, why don't they just piss off? I mean, what he's trying to say and what is there sort of underneath it all is that the darkness descends into many levels, so he's using a modern type of speak. Well, I don't think there's a need for that, but that's his choice. Why not? That these dark powers, ultimately you go through human greed to manipulation, and you go down the scale to what's ever behind those terrible, terrible forces in human life. So you end up with things very unpleasant indeed. I mean, I used to know some very serious criminals. I mean, in this line of work, you meet saints and sinners, and it was just common knowledge amongst people who were quite I mustn't mention names, being in quite serious criminal fraternities, that sooner or later you end up against the occult. The deeper you go, the further down you go. It's manipulation, it's trickery, but sooner or later you come up against the real thing, because it's there and it's behind all those other things. That mustn't be ignored, and certainly there is no neutral position from which this. I mean, Mike's got this gorgeous, balanced American, fair-minded, but we don't live in that type of universe. That view is beautiful. It's beautiful. It's American optimism at its best. But it's just not, it's modernism, but it's just not true. There is no neutral position. We're in the middle of a struggle for the human soul, and we can think of that on a psychological level. I'm very happy with that. But ultimately, those psychological issues start to fade into spiritual issues, whether we like it or not. And those issues suddenly turn up and bite you in the arse with religious formula. Okay, what are we actually dealing with here? Right? And you're talking about very ancient forces battling for our minds and our souls and our bodies. And that simply is the world we've been born into. And there is no level playing field. There is no point of logical reference that isn't being attacked or defended by one side or the other.
Wow. Reverend David just took it to the macro level there, and I like it.
Yeah,
I have
it's
my moments.
awesome.
I have my moments.
So, Daniele, do you have any alpha, right, for any folks out there, like younger folks maybe, who are tuning in and want to be a spy or work in the intelligence community? What would your advice be to them about that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think, with the emergence of the cyber magicians, if you like, I think nowadays, if they want to increase their chance of joining the intelligence agencies, I think they'd have to learn about basically computer science, and excuse me, and big data, basically, which is boring, It's not the old sort of the James Bond lifestyle that you'd expect, fast cars and loads of traveling. It's sort of sitting behind a computer screen. So I think nowadays, I'd recommend reading books on intelligence analysis. There are quite a few books written by former intelligence senior intelligence officials on intelligence analysis. Read books on basically, big data and forensics as well. So criminology would be quite useful in how to understand, how to sort of gather data and analyze that. There was a recent book published by David Oman called How Spies Think, and he talks about how intelligence analysts use mathematical formulas in order to predict the future. So these sorts of skills would be very attractive to the intelligence community. If you're interested in joining as a case officer, as a excuse me, as a spy in the traditional sense, then the sorts of work that these officials do is basically recruit agents and informers. So you'd have to be a very good psychologist in a way. You'd have to be a very good communicator and be a persuasive guy, basically a man or woman. So, when it comes to these sorts of things, sort of human interaction, then I'd suggest, learning more about human psychology. So, there was a case recently of spy cops in the UK, a huge scandal about covert policemen who would infiltrate human rights organizations or popular movements like animal rights or nuclear disarmament or basically civil rights, and they'd start a relationship with people within these movements. So there was a policeman who started covert policeman who started a relationship, sexual relationship with a woman, with an activist within a civil rights movement. And that blew up about 10 years ago. he even had a kid with her. So, I mean, these sorts of things, which are immoral, obviously. So, these things still happen. The James Bond type of spy, they are there. It's just maybe it's not in the right places. It's not within the intelligence community. It's within, the police force. So at least in the UK, I can't. I mean, I think it's different in America, but within the UK, it's sort of there's a separation. But yeah, I mean, overall, I'd say learn more about technology.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. So yeah, where can somebody check out your books if they want to pick any up?
So my website was recently published. It's called www.danieleirandoost.com. My books are listed there. I also list the articles that I've written, which are available for free. I also list, the talks that I've done previously. So yeah, I mean, you can contact me via my website as well. So
awesome. So Reverend David, do you have any final thoughts for us?
Get to church, you lazy swines. Yeah. Ask questions. Ask questions. Ask questions. Ask questions. Some of us old recidivists think that's a religious act. Ask questions. Some of us think it's irreligious if you close questions down. The church hasn't always, in most of its manifestations, lived up to that calling. But, nevertheless, that is its calling. Be open-minded, hug each other. Remember, the world's a big, wonderful place. And maybe we can all get a conference going and meet as an extended family at some point in the future. Yeah, be human, be kind, be loving. There we are.
Excellent.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Well, thank you both so much for visiting with us, and another awesome conversation. Really appreciate it.
Much love to both of you.
All right, Reverend Stu, what are your thoughts on what we just talked about?
I'm very impressed with Daniele. Now, he was a wealth of information, and he was very balanced in his replies. So he wasn't pro-intelligence community, it wasn't anti-intelligence community. I really appreciated that level of, transparency from him.
Yeah, that was really great, and I learned a lot of things right in there. So it's always great to sort of explore new topics live on the show, as it were, because it's like we've said in almost every episode, this is a journey that we're on, and thank you all for joining us. Right. Yeah, I mean, another fantastic conversation here. I can't think of a better way to sort of open up our next season, or season 2, as it were, with this conversation, because I think it's a good bridge from where we left off with Timothy Hogan and the Knights Templar and their own disclosure with the UFO connection to all of that, and then making our way into the experiencer side by talking about the intelligence apparatus and how it effectively lies to its own people, and as always, thank you all so much for your likes, your comments, your subscribes, and your shares, and help us out as much as you can. Just share. As we talked about earlier, it is a little bit challenging sometimes getting these conversations to you, and it just sort of is what it is. So we do the best we can, but as Reverend Parry said, that these conversations are threatening in a way to certain people because it effectively makes them irrelevant and strips away all their power. So
wow,
with that,
that's huge.
Yeah, there it is. So thank you so much, and we'll see you back here real soon.
Thank you.